Dallas, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks, Natalie. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. It's really hot in Sydney. I'm
Is
in
it?
Newcastle, so I don't know what the weather's
Oh.
like for you. Yeah, it's a very hot here. But
Mm.
I'm feeling good. Yeah, thank you so much. So, Dallas, you are the HR consultant in Empower HR Solutions, which is your own company.
That's right.
So you do HR for small to medium-sized business, as well as leadership coaching as well. Is there anything else I should add to that for people who might be listening?
No, I think that's most of it. So training and coaching, yeah, and HR consulting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So anyone who's watching this live, if you have any questions, you can just comment and we'll do our best to answer. And if you have any questions, if you're watching the replay, I'm sure if you ask the question, Dallas will be happy to answer if she sees
Absolutely.
it. So today, although Dallas knows so much about everything to do with HR, we were just talking about kind of the different parts of the HR role she works in with people. From the recruiting to the onboarding to any concerns, the legal, the making sure everything's above board and policy to the exit interviews. We are going to focus on Australian communication style and cultural etiquette and kind of the expectations of an Australian employer at work in Australia. And this could be industry wide. So it doesn't matter about the industry because these are things that are generally mostly the same no matter what industry you work in. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, whilst it can be a little bit unique for
Yeah.
certain businesses, and sometimes we do need to adapt to what that business expectations are. Generally, it's pretty much the same across the board.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So let's start by hello. Can you introduce yourself to us and tell us a bit about what you do in your role as HR and consultant?
Yes. So I've worked in human resources for a long time, more than I probably should admit to. So I have worked across a number of industries, including engineering, allied health, construction, IT, etc. I started my own business probably coming up to 3 years ago to support small to medium businesses with their human resources requirements. So often they don't necessarily have a need for a full-time HR person, but I'm it for them. So as you said, Natalie, I help with from hiring all the way through the entire process. So I work with a range of different businesses, manufacturing, professional services, fast food industry, etc. So it's quite a varied role, but yeah, that's probably a summary of that. Was there anything you wanted to know specifically around that, Natalie?
Yeah, so you've already said this to me, but maybe could we break down the role of HR? So the
Yeah,
kind of different things that you would help
yeah,
with,
yeah,
whether it be the employee and the employer.
yeah, yeah. So from as you said, from hiring. So we often are the one who posts the job ad. We might be doing the shortlisting. We will invite you to the interview. We may be part of the interview process through to then onboarding. So making sure that you know where you need to be on day one, etc. And then through to things like training. So organising training for the organisation, helping out with any sort of performance issues that as they arise, through to obviously through to the exit process, but also ensuring that we're paying correctly. So if you are not aware of it, there is the Fair Work Act under Australia. For Australians, and we need to make sure that we're paying under those requirements
Yeah.
at a minimum. So that's probably more from the employer side. From an employee perspective, you might come to HR because we also may write policies and procedures for the organisation, and you just have a question about, might be from a leave policy perspective. Can I take this leave? Is this what this means under this policy? It might be something around health and safety. It could be under what we call the code of conduct, which is around the expectations of how you behave in the workplace. So there's some of the questions you might have as an employee. Perhaps you're having an issue yourself in the workplace and you're not sure how to navigate that. You're not sure whether you should raise that with your direct manager, how you're best to raise that question. You can come to HR and have that conversation. So we might either help to have that conversation, so we might come with you, or in some instances, we may help you to give you that sort of guidance and advice to have the confidence to take the next step yourself. In some instances, legally, we need to actually investigate some issues as well. So if there's a health and safety breach, or if there's an issue around bullying and harassment, for instance, we are legally obliged to actually then follow that through. So there's some of the issues that you might raise with us. Perhaps you've got a friend also who might want to join the organisation, and you might then bring that to us to follow through to see if we can then find them a job.
That's good to know. That's great. So yeah, there's lots of different things. And I guess a couple of things I'll say and ask is that in some countries, I don't know if HR is the same as it is in Australia. So people in some countries might not feel like HR are approachable, or they might not feel like, they can talk to HR or any concerns. And unfortunately, there is a lot of underpayment in Australia. So absolutely check out Fair Work. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, for sure. And also come to HR if you've got concerns around your terms and conditions of employment. Just come and raise that question, because perhaps there's something that you're not aware of. Perhaps we've been able to interpret it differently to what you have. You can obviously then check the Fair Work website as well, because for different industries, there can be different awards and different agreements. So it's important that you're across that. But it is quite legally written, so sometimes it is left up to interpretation. So it is best if you do have questions around that and you're in a workplace where you do have HR, then you can raise those questions direct with them as well.
So for someone who might not understand the role of HR in Australia when they compare it to their home country, how would you summarize kind of the role of HR in a very simple term?
Yeah, so it has changed over the years. So I think back a while ago, it used to be more of a back office role where it was very much around payroll, processing paperwork, etc. Now to being part of the organisation, helping the organisation to achieve their goals, and being seen as part of the team, not just necessarily as a silo department as such. So yes, it is different depending on the size of the organisation and different industries. But yeah, I guess it is more of a, we're there to answer questions, and we're there to support.
Support, that's it. So answer questions and support. So they're your friend, kind of. They're there to help you, even though it might be scary to approach them sometimes, especially if it's a job you've spent such a long time trying to get in Australia. If there are issues, HR are there to support you and help you, and that's kind of what I want people to understand in Australia, that you're there to help them.
Yeah.
Let's talk about communication style and culture in Australia. So what I would say to my clients or people who ask me is that the communication style in Australia is informal but traditional. Would you agree with that? So, for example, from an English language perspective, the textbooks that you get are very much based on Oxford English and American English, and it's very, very, very formal language. Would you say that Australia is a little bit more relaxed in terms of language, but still quite traditional? Like no slang when you're talking to your boss. You still have to be very polite and respectful, etc. How would you describe it? Would you kind of agree with that, or how would you talk about it from your expertise?
Yeah, so again, it can vary depending on the organisation. If you're working for a large corporate organisation, obviously it is very professional in the way that you communicate, but across all roles, you really should be respectful and professional in your communication. Often when you're talking with your colleagues, you might be out for a coffee or for lunch. then that may sort of, some jargon words or
Yeah.
Australian words might drop into the conversation. If you're unsure about what that means, it's good to ask what that means as well. But generally speaking, yes, it still needs to be professional and respectful across the workplace.
Yeah, perfect. And let's talk about kind of the culture in Australian offices. How would you describe that to someone who is just new to the workplace in Australia? How would you describe it to them?
Yeah, so the culture of the workplace is very much that, we are early starters. So often we will start work at 8:30 or 9. We might finish around 4:30 or 5 o'clock. Punctuality is important at work. If you're seen to always being late to work, that's not a good thing. That there are expectations that need to be met in terms of your role itself. And how that fits into the workplace. So when you start with the organisation, you may be given a position description. It's really important that you understand what that role is, and that you ask the questions if you're unclear about that. We do have things around, as I said, around coffee breaks. Often we'll go out and we'll go and grab a coffee with colleagues. It is a lot around relationships. So developing relationships in the workplace as opposed to just I'm sitting here just doing my job. It's also about developing those relationships through going to lunch with colleagues, going to grab that coffee. Often there are social events in Australian businesses. So going along to those and developing those relationships, getting to know people on a more personal level.
That's interesting you said that, because I've never once even mentioned that when I've talked to people about like the culture in Australia. I feel like it's something that's maybe you just know without thinking about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's really, really helpful. And so you talked about the position description, which is perfect, absolutely. And KPIs, how would you describe KPIs? Because I know some countries don't have that. And when I talk about KPIs, when I'm doing resumes with people, they think, what is a KPI? So in terms from HR perspective and KPIs for an employee, how would you provide advice about that?
Yeah, so when you get your position description, sometimes they will have measures or goals or what we call KPIs attached to those. Not all organisations have them written in the position description. So they set the expectations of what you need to achieve. So whilst people think they're scary, I actually think they provide you with information about what do I actually need to do in this role? What will my manager be then looking at in terms of how I have performed over this period, whether it's 6 or 12 months, what do I need to achieve? So it can be things such as, I need to, bring in this many new customers. I need to actually complete this project with these results. So it just gives more specific information around what's expected.
So let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions based on what I know to be challenges when people first enter work, like from overseas. If they're struggling to meet their KPIs in the first 2-3 months, what advice would you give to them in terms of communication about this?
I would say be really proactive in your communication. So if you're not sure about the expectations, and that's often what I might see as well, we're not really clear about what that means. So we've headed off in some direction that may not necessarily align to what the expectations are, or we're too afraid to say, I didn't understand, or I don't think I can do that. That kind of is worse than just being upfront and saying, do you know what, I'm actually having a problem with this, and letting your manager support you with how to break that down. Is it that you've taken on too many tasks and you need to kind of, reprioritize, or whether it is that you might need some additional training, upskilling or support to enable you to actually complete those tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. When I worked for the government for employment services when I was helping people to get the jobs. My KPIs were to get people jobs. And when I first got them, when I transitioned from training into what like the job coach type role, I really struggled with this number because there's so much to do. Like, and for me personally, I'm quite I don't know how to explain this, like empathetic, caring person. So I might have spent longer with clients than I should have for this job. But I got really stressed about this number. And it was only when I spoke to my manager and he really helped me to understand, like breaking it down into strategies. And he helped me to explain it and he helped me to meet the KPIs for that month. So when you actually are honest about it and communicate your worries, and I was very nervous about that, it does help. And if a manager is not helpful, if the onboarding process has not been very good, because I know that happens, if someone is not clear about what they should do, about what their KPIs are, and they feel a bit confused and nervous, what advice would you give them in terms of communicating with their manager, HR, or what to do to feel more comfortable at work?
Yeah, so I think just to write down what are your key concerns. So often it is just jotting down some points, because often when we go and have these conversations, and if we're quite nervous or anxious about the outcome, we forget what it is that we're actually going to say in the first place. So jot down what are your key concerns. What have you tried so far? So you're showing that you're solution oriented. You're actually trying to fix the problems yourself. This is where I'm coming up with my roadblock. You know, I'm seeing this big number. I don't know how I'm going to achieve that.
Yeah.
Can you, and thinking about what do you actually want to achieve from that conversation? You want to be clear about what the expectations are, but you would also like support in how to break that down. So you're actually coming back into that conversation about making sure that you're achieving the outcome that you're hoping to achieve.
Absolutely. Dorota just says, thank you for bringing the KPIs into discussion. Explaining these is very helpful. That's good. I'm helping Dorota with her resume, and she is like a space planner and architect.
Yes.
So we're trying to really understand KPIs and achievements for her, because from Poland, it wasn't really as focused on that. So some countries, it's really not as focused on KPIs as it is in Australia. I had a question, but completely forgot. I'm so sorry. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So that is one thing that I learned very quickly. And every workplace is different, obviously, but solutions. So instead of going, would you agree with this? Instead of going to your manager or your supervisor with a problem, you would focus on a solution-oriented mindset. So think of the solution and provide them with an example solution. Is that what you would say to people?
I would say that, and this is what I've tried so far, rather than just leaving them with the problem, like I can't achieve this. That's not a good way to leave that conversation. Plus, what are you expecting from that conversation? That they take that problem from you? That's not actually that's not their role, and that's not your role. Your role is to think about what you want to achieve from that conversation. So what are you thinking? And more using that as a sounding board of, you know, am I heading in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So solution oriented is something I learned really quickly in Australia. It's a really good mindset to have if you have problems. So one of the key problems, so you spoke about networking and keep building connection when you are in a workplace. It's just as important as doing your job. And that's absolutely something I've witnessed as well. One of the main challenges that international professionals have when they go into a new workplace is that is that they really struggle with communication, and their English level, just to point out, their English level is very high, you know, but with the Australian accent, with the speed of talking, with the small talk in the office, they really struggle to connect and join in the office small talk because of the colloquial language, the idioms, the slang, you know, the phrasal verbs. So it makes them feel a bit insecure, anxious. yeah, and it takes them some time to warm up and to, build those relationships. Is there any advice that you give about that?
So I think in those situations, you don't necessarily need to go along to a group coffee or lunch if you're feeling that you want to take smaller steps to develop those relationships more in a one-on-one setting.
Yeah,
That can actually kind of ease your anxiety around it, because if you're not clear about what's being said, if you're in a one-on-one, you can actually then ask that question. Sorry, could you repeat that? I don't really quite understand that. Ask them to say it in a different way, as opposed to a group setting, which can make you feel like if they're having conversations and there's lots of jargon or slang, you can feel quite left out of that
yeah,
conversation.
absolutely. So
And then
yeah,
when you build your confidence, then you can go along maybe to those group lunches, if that's, yeah, once you've worked up to that.
absolutely. So connect on a smaller basis first. So another question which I've just thought of, and I think I'm asking this very quickly because I've just forgotten a question because I've got we were talking about how tired we are today, so I keep forgetting. So let me ask this quickly before I forget. Is I say the style of communication is concise. Australian employers like straight to the point, concise communication. So
That is
an example I would give is when I worked in one of my previous jobs within the government. I would ask a question and I would see my manager's face and he'd just be like you could see the frustration kind of on his face, and he wanted me to ask it significantly quicker than I was. So eventually when we built the relationship, he'd be like 2 second version, 2 second version, and he would try and coach me to simplify my language
Yeah.
and my questions. And I know that in some cultures, some languages, for example Brazilian, Portuguese, Spanish, they've got very flowery kind of adjective language where they talk a lot, which is beautiful. So how would you describe the expectations of management and even your teammates in Australia when it comes to the concise, straightforward, authentic communication that they want?
Yeah, so we're quite direct in our communication. So, as you said, there's kind of not a lot of fluff. It's
No.
just, this is what I need. And so thinking through before you have the conversation, what you actually want to say, and yes, how do you say in the least number of words possible? So thinking about, what do I actually want to achieve from this conversation? What information do I need to impart? And then what's the outcome I'm looking for? So I would suggest, while you're getting used to that, to really maybe jot it down even, or just think through
Yeah.
what you actually want to say before you say it, because you don't want someone to be tuning out partway through that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. My partner does it as well, by the way. He works in management in Australia. He has the same thing. He goes 2 second version to me. And so it's not even just this one person that said it to me. I feel like it's a thing in Australia.
It is, yeah. We're quite direct in our conversation, in our communication, which can be a bit off-putting as well for some people who aren't used to that, because we are quite direct and then we move on.
Yeah.
And you're left to process that.
And it's not rude. It's
No,
not.
it's not. It's just how it is.
Easy, direct, straight to the point.
Yes.
And am I correct in saying that workplaces and just generally Australian people really value authentic communication?
Absolutely.
Well,
Yes.
can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think when especially when you're developing those relationships, people want to develop a relationship with you as your authentic self.
Yeah.
I feel that people who aren't authentic or inauthentic, that their true authentic self comes out somewhere down the track.
Yeah.
And that doesn't help to build that trusting relationship if you're not authentic.
Yeah.
In workplaces today, they say bring your whole self to work, bring your authentic self to work, and it is about finding the right workplace that is the best fit for your authentic self.
Yeah, I love that. And your authentic self comes with grammar mistakes and an accent and asking what a word means. So it's perfectly okay to do that. And would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. You shouldn't be shying away from asking or clarifying,
Yeah.
because the last thing you want to do is head off in some direction because you thought that's what they meant, but actually you didn't clarify that,
Mhm.
or that you're back at your desk then anxiety, with that anxiety provoking thought process of what I don't really understand. I'm too afraid to ask the question. You're better off asking that question.
Yeah, perfect. So, just a couple quick other questions. So, if you could provide maybe 3 to 5 tips for a non native English speaker who's just coming into the workplace in a corporate world in Australia, what would they be? What would your biggest tips be? Maybe 3 to 5 ish.
Yeah, so my biggest tips would be, don't be afraid to ask if you're not sure about the expectations, if you're not sure what's being said.
Yeah,
That would be my biggest takeaway, I think, would be don't be afraid to ask that question. I think also when it comes to different workplaces, often we need to adapt to the workplace,
yeah,
asking questions, even at the onboarding process around, what should I be wearing when I come to work? Again, not being afraid to ask those questions. And then I think it's around building those relationships. So whether it is in that workplace or as you're going through the interview process or you're looking for a job, a lot of it is around building those relationships. So I'd say they're probably my top three. Also, I think, yeah, being prepared. So being prepared for those conversations, going in prepared around that communication piece, and also, yeah, if you're and then I think the other piece is really about adapting to the culture of the workplace. So, whether that's in a business to business role where you're in a corporate, or whether you're in a smaller business where it's a little bit more relaxed.
yeah, absolutely perfect. Thank you. So I have it's possibly a more difficult question for you. And we so I've had some really unfortunate situations where one in particular I'm thinking about where she suffered some quite significant workplace discrimination. Um, and unfortunately, she did not, or she did raise it with her HR department, but they didn't necessarily do the right thing in a way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not a necessarily uncommon thing to happen across Australia.
Yeah.
It's. I'd like to just clarify that it is uncommon. I think if you look at percentages, it doesn't happen often.
No.
But in the world that I work in, because I work with international
Yeah.
professionals, I hear about it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who is facing discrimination, who has possibly very hurtful jokes or remarks about themselves or their accent, and they have a real dread and anxiety about work? What advice would you give to them in that context?
Yeah, so I think try and resolve it internally first. So try and speak to your manager if you're confident to do so, to talk about what the impact is on you as well. So not just the issue, but what's the impact to you. If you're not getting that support, or perhaps your manager doesn't know what to do with that,
That was
to go to HR. Again, if you feel that that's not being resolved internally in HR, there are external third parties that you can go to that can assist you with those matters. So you can do a Google search on those. You can also, obviously, you can see a lawyer around that as well. But yes, I think that if you first try and resolve the matter internally, because even a third party will look at what steps have you taken to resolve that internally first.
that's
And if they haven't then addressed the matter properly, then there's obviously questions about their internal processes too.
perfect. That's great. That's a good point that the internal resolution would be even discussed as a third party. Um, and final question. I said that it's common, right? And I feel like maybe I was incorrect because I think in the grand scheme of Australian workplaces, it's not common. I think, generally Australia is an inclusive place, etc. But the people who I'm speaking to do feel that there is discrimination against them. what is your experience? Do you feel that generally in all of the workplaces that you've worked, Australia is an inclusive workplace when it comes to hiring people from overseas? And what would you say to people who have the mindset that Australia will discriminate against me because of my accent?
So I don't. There are a lot of businesses who are quite multicultural businesses anyway. So I would say from that point of view, they can be quite inclusive. In the majority of instances of companies I've worked for, that hasn't really been an issue. I think if you're feeling as a an overseas candidate applying for roles in Australia, you might feel you're discriminated against if companies are looking for local experience, or there are certain requirements that need to be met for you to be able to then work for their organisation. But it is about finding the right organisation for you as well, because as I said before, bringing your authentic self to work is so important. So if you feel that, I've applied for this role and they didn't consider me because I don't have local experience, keep pushing on. Keep finding other companies and reaching out to them, because they may be more likely to take you.
Perfect. That's perfect. And it's so, so true. Would you mind just quickly telling us why companies like local experience? Because I say, sorry, it's about the networks, particularly in some industries, sales and marketing communication. They want people to have the existing networks within Australia,
Yeah.
maybe WHS, risk, their leadership style, and things like that. Is there anything else you would add from your experience in HR?
Yeah, so I'd say that they seem to be the key ones. So around having those networks, especially if you're let's say in a business development or sales role, you need to have that they are looking for those existing networks that you've got. I think in some instances it might be that if you come into Australia without the local experience, the organisation might need to provide you with additional supervision and support for you to be able to be registered here in Australia. And I know that applies for some different roles and industries. The company may not have capacity to provide that support to you. So I think that's where it kind of lends to more so, do we have the capacity to support you, to upskill you in how we do things here? Also, obviously, around building codes, standards, things like that. Obviously, then you need to get across all those changes. So organisations, if they're weighing up, we've got someone who already knows all this versus someone who we need to upskill, they're obviously weighing up the cost benefit analysis there.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important because it is a challenge, and so many people are like, they get so frustrated and disappointed, but it's so important to understand the reasons behind it. It's not about discrimination necessarily. It's about the way they work and the time that they have in a business right now. So yeah, as Dallas says, keep pushing through, keep finding that employer who is a good fit for you. Yeah. That's me. Do you have anything else you'd like to say? Or
no, I think that's everything. There's probably just one other point, which is that here in Australia, we might ask you for feedback as an employee about changes that might impact you, or we often do employee surveys. That might be different to what you're used to in your home country, because we always, we're looking at enhancing or improving the workplace experience. So again, just thinking about that professional, respectful feedback.
yeah.
Because we might be looking for that constructive feedback, but just how you best present that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I'll add as well, from my experience, like monthly catch-ups with your manager as well. It
Yes.
might be common for that, and it's not scary. It's actually a really positive thing, in my opinion, to have that, communication with your manager every month for your professional development, your growth, your sense of well-being at work. A lot of my clients think it's scary and they're going to get into trouble every month, and it's not.
No, some even have weekly one-on-ones. So,
right.
and that's just part of the company culture.
Yeah.
It's not specifically about you're going to get in trouble. It's as a well-being check-in, and to ensure that they're providing the support for you to progress your work as well.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, it's different. It's different.
It
And
is.
generally in Australia, there's a lot of policies, procedures, rules to help you and support you and make sure everything's right. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been really helpful. There's been a lot of things that I wouldn't think about to say to people. So it's been a super, super valuable chat with you, Dallas. So thank you, sincerely, thank you for that. So if you want to reach out to Dallas, you can connect with her on LinkedIn, and she posts about HR things sometimes, and also on Instagram as well. Yeah, perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Thanks for asking me to be part of your series.
No worries, and thank you for providing your very expert advice. And this replay will be up on my website with all Dallas's information with subtitles really soon as well. Okay. So thank you, Dallas. Thanks everyone for your questions.
Thank you.